The electricity bill had suddenly spiked, prompting me to hurriedly call the power company. An employee arrived promptly, looking puzzled as he inspected the outdoor outlet. "Did you notice this wire before?" he asked, gently moving the potted plant to reveal a strange wire leading toward my in-law's house. Bob and I exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the bizarre discovery. "Do you know anything about this wire?" the employee pressed. "Hey Bob, could this be?" "Yeah, no doubt about it. This is why our electric bill went through the roof." Bob unplugged the wire decisively. Immediately, a shrill scream pierced the air from my in-law's direction. "What? Probably my mother-in-law," I muttered. Soon after, hysterical voices grew louder behind their door, heading our way. Suddenly, my mother-in-law emerges from the bushes. "My name is Mary Johnson, a 32-year-old stay-at-home mom with a passion for trying limited-time desserts. I always gather information about desserts, whether from friends or through my own research. Bob, my kind husband, supports my hobbies. We've known each other since college. I've always admired his consistent kindness. I've also cherished my in-laws who raised such a wonderful man. Many married friends complain about their mothers-in-law, but thankfully, that's not the case for us. My mother-in-law and I bond over desserts. She's always delighted with my recommendations. My father-in-law, though quiet, has a reassuring smile. They both adore me, and I feel the same about them. They live just a 30-minute drive away, close enough but not too close. Sometimes I've wondered if we could live together harmoniously, given our mutual affection, but life isn't always that simple." One day, I was caught off guard by the news from Bob. "What? Your parents?" It turned out, my in-laws were moving into the vacant house next door. I had always assumed they owned their home, but it seems they were actually renting. Their current place had aged, prompting them to seek a new residence. Upon discovering the empty house adjacent to ours, they swiftly decided to make the move. It was a sudden change in proximity that immediately sparked anxiety within me. So far, I had enjoyed a good relationship with my in-laws without any major issues. Now, I couldn't help but wonder if things would remain okay. Living next door meant the potential for daily interaction, which, while I cared for them, felt a bit overwhelming. Yet voicing these concerns seemed impractical. The distance was too close for comfort. When Bob gently suggested to his parents, "Maybe you shouldn't move," they brushed it off, convinced that their close relationship with us would make everything fine. I had even entertained the thought of us living together, a notion I now regretted entertaining. As my anxiety grew, our in-laws moved in. We greeted them cautiously, initially establishing boundaries that seemed to work. However, as they settled in, my mother-in-law began testing those boundaries in ways that surprised and frustrated me. She disregarded common courtesies, dropping by unannounced and acting as if our home was hers. It felt like they were monitoring our every move, invading our privacy with their constant presence. Then, one day when my mother-in-law paid an unexpected visit and inspected our dinner, she dropped a bombshell. "Hey Mary, I've been thinking maybe you could stop locking the door." I couldn't believe my ears. In this day and age, who suggests leaving the house unlocked? Not locking the door means anyone could stroll in at any time, which is far from comforting. It's clearly a risky idea. Since my mother-in-law moved nearby, even the doorbell ringing makes my heart race. Now, the thought of her letting herself into our home without warning is unsettling. I definitely couldn't agree to that. Lately, with everything going on, the idea of leaving the door unlocked feels downright scary. I politely declined with a smile, trying to keep the mood light, but she frowned and insisted, "Oh Mary, you're so cautious. But don't worry, I'll ask the neighbors to keep an eye out for you. And remember, your father-in-law and I will be dropping by often." I know she means well, and I appreciate her concern. That's why I couldn't bring myself to tell her how overwhelming her frequent visits had become. But everyone has their limits. Last week alone, it felt like she was practically living at our place. I've been having tea with my mother-in-law at her home every day. Spending this much time together, it's no surprise tensions can arise. I've come to realize that a good relationship between a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law depends on maintaining the right boundaries. She started leaving unnecessary potted plants in our yard or planting flowers without asking. It felt like she was asserting her presence without regard for our preferences. If it happened occasionally, I could tolerate it. But every day was pushing it. Since the door incident, she's brought it up repeatedly. I managed to deflect her by citing my strong concerns about security. However, I didn't end it. She began to plead with me in earnest. "I'd like a spare key," my mother-in-law declared. I knew I had to convince Bob to turn down her request. Handing such a powerful item to her now is just out of the question. Despite feeling conflicted about her behavior, I didn't harbor any real dislike toward her. Yes, she could be intrusive, but I understood it stemmed from good intentions. Rather, my reluctance stemmed more from guilt over denying her than anything else. However, as time went on, my feelings toward her began to shift. Whether it was a change in me, her, both of us, I couldn't pinpoint, but gradually I started to feel increasingly uneasy and annoyed by her remarks. This change occurred a few months after she moved in. It had become routine for her to drop by after lunch. Once, I suggested she join my father-in-law for his walks or shopping outings, but she declined, citing fatigue from walking. Lately, she had begun to exhibit typical mother-in-law traits. Whereas before she would simply thank me for making tea, now there were comments like, "It's lukewarm," or "It's too weak." Her conversation topics often gravitated towards gossip or criticism of others, which left me feeling deflated after her visits. Despite my discomfort, I found myself nodding and forcing a smile to avoid confrontation. It wasn't sustainable. The grass in their yard keeps growing, and they never seem to mow it. I've even considered doing it myself. Today, my mother-in-law was passionately discussing a neighbor's consistently neglected yard. So, I was saying, mid-sentence, my mother-in-law abruptly halted it and glanced towards the bookshelf. Had she spotted a book that caught her eye? Wouldn't it be nice if we could just sit quietly and read together? Did you find a book you're interested in? As I moved towards the bookshelf, she extended her hand past it, retrieving something from the nearby rack. "Susan, please don't touch that." Upon seeing what she had taken, I reached out hastily, but she innocently opened it and exclaimed in delight, "Oh my dear Mary, goodness, did you overspend last month? Your electricity bill is twice as much as ours." To my dismay, my mother-in-law was perusing our household account book as if it were a magazine. "Stop, give it back." When I managed to snatch it away, she chuckled softly. "No need to get so flustered, dear. But Mary, it seems like you're not so good at saving money. Bob must feel bad having a wife who struggles with budgeting. You should try a bit harder, okay?" Her words stung, and I could feel my face flush with embarrassment. The household account book clearly bore the words "private" on both the front and back covers, yet she boldly opened it as if it were a casual read. I was incredulous. "And those desserts you love? I enjoy limited edition treats too, but if you can't save a dime, should you really be indulging?" My mother-in-law continued to criticize, lamenting over our food expenses and the soaring electricity bill, all the while boasting about her own frugality. After lecturing me, she finally seemed satisfied and left. Once she was gone, the weight of her words hit me hard, and I couldn't stop crying. The accumulated stress, along with her intrusive remarks, had pushed me to my breaking point. I sobbed uncontrollably until Bob arrived home. "You don't have to take Mom's words to heart. It's easier said than done," he comforted me. "I'll talk to Mom and ask her not to come over unannounced again." "Yeah, please," I managed to reply. After calming down, I decided to address something that had been bothering me for a while: the mysteriously high electricity bill my mother-in-law had pointed out. Despite no notable changes in our usage, it had inexplicably skyrocketed in recent months. Dealing with her had consumed so much of my energy that I hadn't had the chance to investigate it properly. Bob examined the details on the electricity bill, clearly perplexed. "This doesn't make sense." "I know, right? The next bill is due soon. If it still seems off, we should call the electric company," I suggested. A few days later, a bill arrived with a shocking total of $1,300, more than double our usual amount. Convinced something was wrong, we promptly arranged for an electric company technician to visit. The technician conducted a thorough inspection and then beckoned us over with a curious expression. "Did you folks know about this wire?" With Bob and I approaching, he gently moved a potted plant aside to reveal an external outlet obscured by overgrown leaves. "From this outlet," the technician explained, "there's a wire leading towards your in-laws' house. Do you have any idea about this?" Bob and I exchanged knowing glances, both likely pondering the same possibility. "Hey, Bob, could this be?" "Yeah, it's got to be. This explains the sudden spike in our electric bill." To verify, we followed the wire with the technician, pushing through dense bushes and tall weeds. Sure enough, it led to a storage shed on my in-laws' property. Though we couldn't see where it connected from there, it was evident that it was somehow linked to their house. The technician, with a stern look, asked, "Should I call the police?" "No, we might have to consider it, but let's talk it over first. This property belongs to our parents," I explained. The technician initially appeared tense, possibly suspecting electricity theft, but upon understanding it was a family matter, his expression softened. "Oh, I see. I'll take my leave then." "Yes, thank you for coming out and checking." We appreciate your time, Bob said as we escorted him to his vehicle. After he left, we faced each other in silence, deep in thought. Bob sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. I'm sorry you have to deal with my mother's behavior. It's just. Don't apologize. What should we do now? Bob's parents are likely at home. Should we confront them directly or should we plan our approach first? I asked, contemplating our next steps. Bob, lost in thought, walked towards the external outlet that had been revealed earlier by the technician moving the potted plant aside. Come to think of it, maybe my mother deliberately placed the plant there to conceal this outlet, Bob mused reluctantly, wrestling with the suspicion. What is this wire connected to? Bob asked abruptly, reaching out to unplug it. Wait, is it safe to unplug that? I already did. The thought of them potentially stealing our electricity all this time infuriates me. Bob replied firmly, his frustration palpable. Anyway, we have the employee as a witness. I won't let them make any lame excuses. If we need to, we've got that covered. That's true, I agreed, nodding. Then suddenly, what? A sharp scream pierced the air from Bob's parents' house. Probably my mother-in-law, I sighed. Moments later, there was frantic murmuring, and voices started approaching our direction. With surprising speed, my mother-in-law burst out from behind the hedge. What? Clearly caught off guard to find us there, she exclaimed in surprise upon seeing us. I'm the one surprised here. What are you doing sneaking around here? I challenged, stating my ground. Well, you see, she hesitated, clearly uneasy. Meanwhile, Bob held onto the wire he had removed firmly. Upon noticing it, my mother-in-law attempted to grab the wire from Bob's hand. Bob quickly moved it out of her reach, keeping it hidden behind his back. What's going on here? No, that's what I should be asking you. Bob thrust the wire toward her. This was plugged into our outlet. My mother-in-law's eyes darted around momentarily, then she adopted a defensive posture, looking upwards. So, where does this wire go? Bob pressed, holding the wire firmly. I have no idea, just plug it back in now. Things are a mess here since you pulled it out, my mother-in-law insisted anxiously. How can you ask us to plug it in without knowing where it leads? And now you're acting like you suffered because it was unplugged. It's almost like you're admitting you did it, I remarked, incredulous. But my mother-in-law showed no signs of guilt, only panic. I understood why she was so flustered. Standing beside Bob, I offered a reassuring smile. Susan, please calm down. We can't just plug in a wire when we don't know where it goes. This is our outlet, isn't it? It's no big deal to plug it in just for a moment. Please, she pleaded. Susan, remember what you said about not wasting electricity? About how Bob has a wife who can't even save on electricity. I prodded gently, sensing her discomfort. I won't make it on time, she muttered under her breath, visibly on the edge. What time is it now? It's 9:57. Oh no, I'm done for. With that exclamation, my mother-in-law hurriedly left in a flustered state. Bob looked bewildered by her behavior, but I knew exactly why she was in such a rush. I whispered to Bob, is this what you were talking about? Yeah, if we stick around, she'll definitely show up again, Bob confirmed, tossing the wire aside as we retreated back into the house. Not long after, I heard a clattering noise at the front door, followed by the insistent ringing of the doorbell. It's my mother-in-law, I muttered, unlocking and opening the door. Hello, Susan. About what I was saying earlier, enough of your excuses. Move. Without hesitation, my mother-in-law shoved past me and barged into the house. She appeared visibly agitated, her footsteps echoing heavily as she marched into the living room and collapsed onto the sofa. Bob, who was already in the room, looked puzzled and was about to speak, but my mother-in-law beat him to it. Oh, I'm dying of thirst. Is the tea not ready yet? You're so slow. Anticipating needs without being asked is basic courtesy, you know. I'm right. Also, why do you always lock the door? Everyone in the neighborhood thinks I have a standoffish daughter-in-law. There's nothing worth stealing here anyway. It's just so pretentious, she grumbled. As she continued her tirade, she sighed dramatically. Oh, it's hopeless. I can't take it anymore. I grabbed the half-empty plastic bottle nearby and slammed it down on the table in front of her. She sat there, wide-eyed and frozen in shock. Mary, here's your water, I said calmly, handing her the glass. And about your comment that there's nothing worth stealing in this house, unfortunately, there are people out there who sneak and steal, like stealing electricity. I watched as panic flashed across my mother-in-law's face. Sitting down next to her, I waited for her reaction. Avoiding eye contact, she stared straight ahead, her face drained of color. Mary, what's the matter? You seem really shaken, I said, trying to lighten the tension with humor. Susan, even I have my limits. Did you think I was infallible or something? I chuckled, but my mother-in-law remained as tense as if she had seen a ghost. Turning to Bob for support, she found him shaking his head. Next to her sat her daughter-in-law, now seeming more like a formidable opponent, and a few feet away was Bob, unwilling to intervene. Given the circumstances, my mother-in-law's next move was predictable. I'm sorry, I just remembered I have something urgent to attend to. I should go, she stammered, attempting to rise from the couch. You're not going anywhere, I asserted firmly, pushing her shoulder back down into the sofa. Mary, you were the one complaining about being thirsty, weren't you? You made a fuss about it, and now you say you can't drink water. That's quite hypocritical, don't you think? I said sharply, noticing tears welling up in her eyes as she reached for her bottle. This time, however, Bob stopped her before she could take another sip. My mother-in-law seemed momentarily relieved, but her unease was palpable when I reached for the leftover water. The real confrontation was just beginning. When did you start stealing our electricity? I asked directly. You often accuse me of stealing. That's a terrible thing to say, she deflected, her voice tinged with indignation. But the wire plugged into my outlet leads from your house, doesn't it? I pressed, watching as my mother-in-law struggled to find a plausible excuse. She opened and closed her mouth several times, clearly scrambling for a way to bluff her way out of the situation. Let's be honest, she's trapped with nowhere to go, I thought, feeling frustrated. All she has to do is admit it and apologize. Just as it seemed she had no way out, fate intervened. The doorbell rang, and I went to answer it. It was my father-in-law. Is Susan here? He asked anxiously. Apparently, he had gone out shopping and returned to find the front door unlocked and the TV still on. But his wife was missing. He must have been worried. Seeing her husband, my mother-in-law rushed to him, tears streaming down her face. My father-in-law looked taken aback by her distress. Sensing the need to clarify everything, Bob stepped in and began explaining from the beginning. After contemplating for a moment, my father-in-law began to speak slowly. Isn't there some kind of mistake? It was understandably difficult for him to accept that his wife had been secretly using electricity from their son's house. Then who did the wiring? Do you think a stranger would go through the trouble of connecting someone else's wiring to another person's house? My father-in-law crossed his arms, deep in thought. Eventually he nodded and suggested, let's go have a look. He stood up, but my mother-in-law, clearly flustered, tried to intervene. However, my father-in-law asked Bob to show him what was happening and walked towards the power outlet. The wiring led to a storage shed and wasn't visible from their current vantage point. When my father-in-law investigated and returned, his face had lost all color. I'm so sorry. I apologize sincerely to both of you, my mother-in-law said meekly, resembling a child saying sorry. My father-in-law explained that the wires were connected to a battery, which in turn powered my mother-in-law's computer via an extension cord. She had purchased the battery when they moved into the new house. Initially, she was advised by a salesperson that storing electricity during cheaper nighttime hours and using it during the day would save money. Taking this advice, she began using the house's electrical outlet to charge the battery at night and then use the stored electricity in her own home during the day. At first, that's all she did, my father-in-law continued. But then she noticed the extension cord had an unused socket, so she started plugging in her computer and other appliances. Eventually, she was drawing electricity from our house all day, not just at night. My mother-in-law tried to justify her actions by claiming, I heard it was more economical. Naturally, I was infuriated that she had been stealing electricity without permission. What aggravated me even more was the fact that despite her constant criticism and belittling of me, she had been lying all along. You often criticize how Bob is unlucky to have a wife who can't save money and how I indulge in sweets but can't save a dime. Isn't that true? Her lack of remorse was striking. Saving money on the electricity bill by using someone else's electricity isn't frugality, it's theft. I pressed on, and just so you understand, I won't overlook this simply because we're family. If you don't sincerely apologize, we'll have no choice but to involve the police. My mother-in-law looked surprised, perhaps thinking she could talk her way out of it. How could you do this to me, your own family? She protested. Don't twist things. We're family, and we need to set things right, I retorted, pulling out my phone. She panicked and lunged towards me, but Bob quickly intervened. We have evidence. With all this proof, what more do we need? But if necessary, we can provide even more conclusive evidence, I added, gesturing towards the roof. My mother-in-law strained to see, her face visibly paling. Yes, we have security cameras installed. Coincidentally, the area around the outlet falls within their range, I stated calmly. My mother-in-law let out a distressed "ah" upon realizing the gravity of the situation. Is this enough proof? I asked pointedly. Then with a teasing smile, I added, oh, and by the way, weren't you in a rush today for that limited edition dessert release? It's a shame you had to miss out because of your little electricity scheme. If you hadn't been so preoccupied with stealing power, maybe you could have snagged it online. My mother-in-law sank to the ground, visibly trembling and defeated. After discussing it with Bob, we decided not to involve the police despite her admission and our evidence. It seemed more trouble than it was worth, especially considering she was family. Instead, we arranged for my in-laws to reimburse us for the electricity they use and compensate us for the inconvenience caused. Living in such close proximity have strained our relationship and tensions were palpable. Eventually, we received some welcome news. My in-laws decided to move back to their previous house. Rumors about the electricity theft had spread, particularly about my mother-in-law, which deeply upset her. She tearfully expressed a desire to return to their old home. Interestingly, I had thought my mother-in-law was well regarded by her neighbors, but it turned out they treated her delicately rather than warmly. After settling their debts with us and covering the moving expenses, my in-laws were left lamenting their financial strain. However, we made it clear that we wouldn't be assisting them financially. They would need to manage on their own, possibly by cutting back on their indulgences. With my mother-in-law no longer around, life took on a brighter hue. Our electricity bills normalized, and I found myself enjoying each day to the fullest. Now, I'm contemplating which dessert to savor next without any worries.